everyone, and welcome to Storytime. I am your Storytime reader, Ms. Nikki. Today's read aloud is one of my favorites. It's a sweet and beautiful story titled Ojichan's Gift. When the main character in this book, named Mayumi, right here, was born, her grandfather, who she calls Ojichan, right here, created a special garden for her. It was unlike any other garden she knew. It had no flowers or vegetables. Instead, Ojichan made the garden out of all kinds of stones. Yes, stones of different shapes and sizes. And as she grew older, when Mayumi visited her Ojichan in Japan, they would tend to the garden together. Let's read and learn more about Ojichan's gift. Ojichan's Gift, written by Chieri Uegaki and beautifully illustrated by Genevieve Sims. When Mayumi van Horten was born, her grandfather built her a garden. It sat behind a tidy brown house nearly halfway around the world, and it was unlike any other garden she knew. There were no tulips or daffodils or daisies, no carrots or cabbages or peas. Ojichan had made the garden out of stones, big ones, little ones, and ones in between. Some reminded Mayumi of turtles, others stood like mountains, rugged and tall. Around the border, Ojichan had planted pine and maple, boxwood and bamboo, and in just the right spot by a stone lantern and a persimmon tree was a sheltered bench where Ojichan and Mayumi would share onigiri, bento packed in a lacquered box. Every summer, Mayumi spent 2 months with Ojichan, and with each year her ability to care for the garden grew. She learned that moss on a rock was a gift of time, not to be washed away with a hose, that weeding was more pleasant in the morning, and that clipping shrubs to look like clouds was the best of all reasons to prune. Raking gravel, though, was what Mayumi loved the most. She loved how the tiny rocks chattered as they passed through the rake's wooden teeth. She loved the different patterns she could make, wavy, zigzag, and straight, but rings like ripples in a pond were her favorite. And when she was done, Mayumi and Ojichan would sit and enjoy the results of her efforts in happy silence. Often, when Mayumi was back home in her narrow house, listening to the clamor of traffic outside, she would wish for the sound she heard at Ojichan's, the rustle of leaves or the creak of a bough with a twittering bird. At those times, Mayumi would open up the tin that held the souvenirs from her visits. Leaves she'd pressed in a book until they dried, as delicate as dragonfly wings. Tiny pine cones, still springy between her fingertips. A smooth black stone that, when warmed in her hand, helped her to remember. Then one summer, everything changed. Mayumi noticed the differences as soon as she arrived. Things in the house that used to shine were dusty and dull. In the garden, shrubs and trees were overgrown, and dead leaves and needles littered the ground. Everything looked left alone. She understood now that what her parents had told her was true. Ojichan could not live here anymore. Later, in Ojichan's room, Mayumi tried to smile while she showed him photos from the school year. Birdsong wafted in on a green-scented breeze. Mayumi looked out at her garden. "Hi," Ojichan said. "It's been waiting for you. Mayumi-chan. After lunch, while Oji-chan napped, Mayumi went into the garden and walked around onto the gravel. As she stared at the rock that towered over every rock around it, the tight bud of feeling that had been in her chest all morning suddenly burst open, and with a rush, she put her hands on the rock, braced her feet in the dirt beneath, and gave a mighty shove. When nothing happened, Mayumi turned around and leaned back, knees bent. She pushed as hard as she could, wanting the rock to give, and if it did, she was going to push and push and push until the thing toppled down. But the rock didn't budge, not even a little. Mayumi kicked the ground hard, spraying gravel everywhere. She kicked again and again, not caring until a rock ricocheted back and hit her on the face. She froze, and as she noticed the mess she'd made, she put a hand to her cheek and sagged to the ground. After a while, Mayumi stood up and began raking because it was something useful that she could do. And as she slowly raked the gravel back in place, stooping now and then to pick up a stray leaf or to pocket a shiny pebble, a tiny idea took root. The next morning, while her parents packed up the house, Mayumi knocked on Oji-chan's door. "Ah, Mayumi-chan," he said. "Is it lunch already?" Mayumi walked to where he sat and held out the lacquered bento box. "This feels heavier than onigiri," Ojichan said as he took it from her. He grinned. "What are you feeding me? Maybe mud pie?" Mayumi smiled and shook her head. Ojichan set the box on his lap, and after a moment he lifted the lid. "Now I've made you a garden," Mayumi said. Ojichan took her hand and gripped it tight. "Arigato, Mayumi-chan," he said. "Honto ni arigato. Thank you very much." Back home, Mayumi unpacked her suitcase and set aside several small bags. Then she took out her tin and emptied it of her treasures. The sandy gravel went in first, followed by stones of various sizes, placed just so. She added a pine cone next, and then a leaf before patting the gravel flat. Then, using her pinky as a rake, Mayumi carefully made smooth, even rings around the three largest rocks. And though the garden was much smaller and the sound was much softer, if she closed her eyes and listened, she was certain she could still hear the pebbles' soothing chatter. The end. Did you like this heartwarming and tender story? I love this book for so many reasons. But most of all, I can connect to this book, to Mayumi's story, because I too started a garden with my grandfather. Reading this book brought back beautiful and precious memories of gardening with my Aja. My grandfather taught me a lot about plants, and we created a lasting bond by simply gardening together. Can you connect or relate to this book too? Perhaps you enjoy gardening or doing another activity with your grandpa or grandma. It's a great way to create memories and pass down family traditions. Okay, readers, I enjoyed reading this book to you, and I look forward to reading another book in a few days. Until then, take care and stay curious.